Hello everyone, welcome to Inconvenient Truths. I'm your host, Jennifer Zeng. Today is the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. A few days ago, I received an interview request from a journalist in Poland asking me what does the CCP's rule mean for the Chinese people. So today I'd like to talk about this as well as some highlights of this morning's celebration at Tiananmen Square and another very important question: how much longer can the CCP still exist? Before we move on, please make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell if you haven't. Also, please share my channel and videos with your friends and family as well as on your social media platforms so that more people can learn the inconvenient truths. Now, let's move on to our topics today. First of all, let me give you a few highlights from the CCP's celebration this morning. The first thing to notice is it is a one-man show of Xi Jinping. Let's watch the screenshot of today's headline flashes at Xinhua's website. We are playing it at 4 times faster just to let you get an idea how everything is about Xi Jinping. Also, everything is arranged to achieve this purpose too, even including the outfits. Let's say a few pictures. Yes, so while everyone else wears a suit or Western-style suit, only Xi Jinping wears something called the Chinese tunic suit, which is also called the Zhongshan suit or Mao suit. It remained the standard formal dress for the first and the second generations of CCP leaders and is a symbol of national sovereignty. The second highlight is Xi Jinping's warning messages to foreign powers. In his more than 1 hour long speech, apart from repeating how the CCP was the choice of history and the Chinese people, and shouting out loudly, "Long live the great, glorious, and always correct CCP" at the end, Xi Jinping sends clear warning message to foreign powers. Let's watch a short clip of his speech.
中国人民
Please read the
也绝不
subtitles.
允许任何外来势力欺负、压迫、奴役我们。谁妄想这样干，必将在14多亿中国人民用血肉铸成的钢铁长城面前碰得头破血流。
Quite impressive, right? Have you shed blood and have your heads crushed? Actually, a Chinese commentator says there is a hidden message in that. To dare the Western powers, if you dare to do something to us, we have 1.4 billion Chinese hostage with us. So that's the Xi Jinping's message to the world. The third highlight is the overall visual design of the celebrations. Let's see a few more pictures. From the visual impressions, we can see the blood hunger of the CCP as well as the fact that China is having a cultural revolution too. China is more and more like North Korea. When I saw thousands upon thousands of people waving the CCP's red flags, I really thought I was watching something from the Cultural Revolution or North Korea. See this one, how magnificent. So the fourth highlight is as many as 8 former CCP members of the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau were absent from the art performance held at the National Stadium in Beijing. Another strange thing is the CCP suddenly changed the date of the performance from June 29th to June 28th without explaining why. And again, at today's ceremony at Tiananmen Square, CCP's third-generation head Jiang Zemin, as well as former Premier Zhu Rongji, were absent. This is very unusual given this is such an important event for the CCP. Therefore, people have been speculating that the internal power struggle within the CCP must still be very fierce, to the point that many former leaders chose to boycott Xi Jinping's one-man show. The fifth highlight is 70,000 people who attended the celebration, including media workers, were required to take off their masks so that they looked better. So do you think the CCP really cares about people's lives? Well, the above are a few highlights from today's event. Now, let's see how ridiculously tight the security has been in Beijing and China before the ceremony. The following are just some of the measures taken. In Beijing, even kitchen knives are under restrictions until tomorrow, that's July the 2nd. A knife store associate told the Epoch Times that restrictions are imposed on the purchase of knives. You must bring your ID card to the store to buy a knife, and the sales need to be registered. And the registration information will be handed over to the police department for the record. And this applies to all stores in Beijing. Also, even if the purchase is registered and approved, you cannot take the knives away. They will be mailed to you, but only after tomorrow, that is July the 2nd. Also, the Beijing government issued a flying ban from June 13th to today. 9 districts, a very large area, were designated as restricted flying zones. All flying objects, including doves, drones, model airplanes, kites, and balloons, are all prohibited. And you know what? When I wrote about this for the Epoch Times a while ago, an editor asked me, seriously, how could they control birds? And I replied, yes. In Beijing, doves are all raised and kept by human beings. If their masters don't release them, they stay in their cages. This actually reminds me of another similar story. Many years ago, after I submitted my memoir to my publisher, Allen and Nowen, a leading publisher in Australia, they asked an editor to edit it. When the editor saw such a sentence in my memoir in 1981, I moved to Mianyang with my father. She immediately crossed out my father and changed it to my parents. She thought if a family moved from one city to another, of course the entire family moved together. So she took it for granted that I made a mistake with my word selection, as I was a Chinese. I had to tell her no, I moved with my father. My mother and sister didn't move together with us, as in China, everything needed permission. My mother didn't have permission to move, so she stayed. It took her more than 4 years to get permission to join my father, and when she finally moved to my father's city too, I had already left my hometown for university. So actually, in my childhood and youth period, there was only a very few years when my entire family lived together. So you see, that's how life and things are different in CCP's China. For people in the West, many things can be taken for granted. But for people in CCP's China, they may never dare to imagine those things, or they may even die before they can get these things, or they don't know at all that they don't have those things, such as the freedom to move within your own countries. Sorry, this is a little bit off the track. Anyway, I've written a short article about this experience. I will put the link to that article in the transcript that I'm going to publish on my website at jenniferzengblog.com. If you're interested, please go to my website later to find out that article. Now let's go back to the tight control on Beijing. Not only that doves cannot fly, but shops near Tiananmen Square were forced to close on June 30th and today for 2 days for the celebration. One shop associate said that government people locked the gate of their shop directly and took away the key. Even in a county called Xianghe, which is more than 30 miles away, street vendors were not allowed to do their businesses during the celebration. Netizens also revealed that even natural gas supply was cut off in Donghuamen area, which is very close to Tiananmen. The CCP fears that natural gas could cause fires. So how can people cook without natural gas supply? Don't worry, the CCP has you covered. The community will deliver ready food to residents in this area until July the 4th. When the natural gas supply is resumed. In another area called Hepingmen, the authorities are giving food vouchers to people who are affected by the cut of the gas supply. Now, let's see a picture. Can you figure out what this is? Well, it is a manhole cover near Tiananmen, which is welded with small pieces of some kind of material. The 2 Chinese characters on the pieces say security inspection. Why did they weld the manhole covers? Well, I guess to prevent people from getting to the Tiananmen Square area where the celebration was to be held through the sewage system. Sometimes we saw that sort of thing from movies, right? People escape or enter somewhere through the sewage system, so the manhole covers had to be welded. Posted packages are under tight control too. Let's see a picture. This is a message saying that as the 100th anniversary of the CCP was approaching, all packages delivered to Beijing would be strictly controlled. Extra checking would be conducted. Any metal material in books, including staples in magazines, need to be removed. The message says, we are sorry for this, but you will need to rebind your books and magazines after you receive them. Well, these are just some of the crazy security measures in Beijing. Now let's watch a short clip shot in Beijing a few days ago. I had lived in Beijing for 17 years. I had never seen so many police and military dogs on the street, actually. Not such dogs at all when I lived there in the 1980s and the 1990s. So that's how many dogs are there. Somebody shot this and he was also he was very surprised by what he was saying, so he shot this thing and shared it on the social media platforms. Okay, let's end here. Yeah. As a matter of fact, before the anniversary of the Tiananmen massacre this year, that was June 4th, the CCP already started cracking down on dissidents. Quite a few got arrested, such as Zhang Wuzhou and Wang Aizhong in Guangzhou City, Chen Siming in Hunan Province, and Yang Shaozhen in Guangzhou City. So these are what has been happening in the real world, in academic and theoretical circles, or maybe we should say the propaganda circle. The CCP has been trying very hard to convince people how great it is and to attack anyone who wants to criticize it. And they have come up with a term called historic nihilism. I don't know how to read this word properly. 2 million online posts were deleted for being historical nihilism. The CCP's logic is, if you don't recognize that the CCP is the great savior of China and Chinese people, you are practicing historic nihilism. and you are wrong and should be condemned. As far as I can see, both what happened in the real world and the propaganda circle reflect the same issue, the CCP's biggest fear for its own legitimacy. After 100 years, the CCP is still trying very hard to convince people that it is the choice of history and the people. It says it is the choice of the history and the people, but it never dares to allow people to vote. Without a referendum, how can you say you are chosen by the people, right? Now let's move on to our next topic. How long can the CCP still exist? Recently, quite some overseas Chinese dissidents are showing optimism that the CCP won't last long. Former CCP Navy Commander Yao Cheng, whom we quoted before, even said that he wouldn't buy a property in the US as the CCP would collapse within several years and that he would be able to go back to China soon. We must say that the international environment for the CCP is worsening now. More and more countries are talking about holding the CCP accountable for the pandemic, and the global anti-CCP sentiment is still rising. In a sense, the CCP's international environment has never been as bad as it is now. Before the CCP took power, it had the support of the former Soviet Union and had some allies in the international communist camp. Then, during the 10 years after the CCP's relationship with the Soviet Union turned sour around 1963, its environment was quite severe. But at that time, it could still try to find a space to survive between when the US and the Soviet Union were fighting against each other. Later on, the US President Nixon extended an olive branch to the CCP. At that time, the West viewed the CCP as a force that could assist the fight against the Soviet Union. Because of this, the CCP was able to survive even though it had brought the nation's economy to the very verge of collapse. That was also the reason why the CCP could survive until now. So, the international environment is very important for the CCP. Some people argue that the CCP can choose to cut ties and close its doors to the outside world again, and just have the so-called internal circulation, like what Mao Zedong did in the 1950s and the 1960s. However, time has changed. The CCP couldn't do what it had done before. In 1949, when the CCP established its regime, there were only about 10% urban population. Right now, the urban population has exceeded 60%. Once China decouples from the world industrial chain, unemployment and the associated crisis would be many times more severe than in the Mao's era. Even Mao's internal circulation was unable to last for more than 10 years. Only 7 or 8 years after the CCP cut ties with Soviet Union, Mao Zedong was forced to turn to the US, which the CCP had been attacking for over 20 years. Today, Xi Jinping's ability to carry on alone without the world wouldn't be higher than that of Mao Zedong. So how long can the CCP still exist? In terms of the external environment, this year and the next year, more and more countries will continue to try to hold the CCP accountable for the pandemic and seek compensation. Something dramatic could happen during this process. In terms of the CCP's internal environment, 2021 to 2023 will be the peak for the China's local governments to repay their debts. The real estate industry will also meet its peak for debt repayments during the same period of time. So, the CCP could face both financial and fiscal crises, and that could cause a lot of uncertainty for the CCP too. Also, Xi Jinping might seek to become the chairman of the CCP and stay in power forever in the 20th National Congress of the CCP, which will be held next year. And the new CCP leadership will officially take office in March 2023. Also in 2023, several major U.S. arms sales to Taiwan will begin to be delivered. With this, the military power gap between Taiwan and the CCP's China will narrow. So, will Xi Jinping try to grasp the narrow window between now and then to invade Taiwan? Whether he intends to do so or not, he did vow that the CCP would liberate or unify Taiwan in his speech this morning. So this will also bring some uncertainty to the situation. So, with the combination of the several factors we just mentioned, the peak of pressure on the CCP will occur in the period from now to 2023. And among all the factors, the most unpredictable one is the pandemic. It could also be the most overwhelming one. The CCP virus is now still spreading and mutating, while the Chinese vaccines are not very effective. If China is hit again by some new mutations, it can become a catastrophic black swan event, and things can also go out of control very quickly. Now, in conclusion, what does the CCP's rule mean for Chinese people? My reply is, for the Chinese people, the rule of CCP means mass killing, endless class struggles, deprivation of wealth, human dignity, souls and freedom, and destruction of moral values, as well as the natural, cultural, and human environment suitable for human beings' existence. No other regime has killed so many lives and destroyed its own culture and environment to such an extent. The nation and people are doomed if the CCP cannot be ended. Well, that's all for today's Inconvenient Truths. Thank you very much for watching. Again, please remember to subscribe to my channel, like and share my videos, and leave us some comments. See you on Monday.